Welcome to Islamic art. So first I'd like for you to stop this video and take a minute and jump over to the PowerPoint or the required video page in Canvas and just watch this introductory video. It's kind of cool. It gets you in the mood and the feel for the lecture that you're about to also listen to. After you've done that, come on back. So welcome back if you did go. We're looking here at one of the manuscripts that was a big part of the Islamic culture and art. So we can see some of the similarities to the Byzantine art, where there's the flat evidence and there's not really of so much depth perception that we've studied in other cultures. And we're also noticing here there's actually figures in this particular illustration. A lot of the Islamic art that we'll be talking about, there's not the evidence of people, animals, or figurines. So I thought I would go ahead and find a map that kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse as to what was going on in around 500 CE, the areas of the world that historians think were inhabited. So remember, sorry about that. Remember that there are all different trade routes. There's ships navigating these different trade routes being explored. And so we've spent a lot of time in Europe, and we're now also spending more time in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. We're going to be moving over to Asia, East Asia, basically spending some time in China and Japan, and then we'll be ending up over here in the Americas. But I just wanted you to be aware of how much movement was happening at this time in history and the speculations of how that was going on. Also to remind you of the Roman territory, and so we're starting this lecture in about the 5th century, but in around 116 CE, we had discussed that there were thousands of miles of roads that the Roman military had built. And so here it shows you kind of the key or the legend to this map, and you can see the tremendous amount of roads that would enable the different cultures to have such a huge impact on being able to conquer and dismantle and or bring their belief systems into these different territories. And again, I'm just trying to put some context to all the different things that are going on because it can get a little bit overwhelming. So we talked a lot about the Christians with the Byzantines, and you can see here I had mentioned all of the monasteries, and so you can really see the amount of monasteries that were a big part of the community that could have been Christian, but they also could have easily been converted, depending upon who was paying for their food, sustenance, and supporting them. So these are all things I think that are relevant and interesting in thinking about how the different religious missionaries got the word out to have the faiths believe in whatever that current ruling class was trying to get everyone to believe. And this is where we are now in the Islamic world. And so around 622, the Islamic world really started to expand, and Muhammad's ideas were things that people really resonated with, obviously. And I mean, that's how he gained a tremendous amount of control and territory with his belief system in one God, but in a different way than Christianity was promoting their ideas at the time. And so you can see under Muhammad, first he was just really expanding everything in Saudi Arabia, and then his territory grew to be around 650, and then expanded even more over to Spain, Morocco, throughout Turkey, and parts of North Africa. So one of the things that's really interesting that we'll be talking about that's part of a lot of religions is this idea of pilgrimage, and it's this common experience where you would, have some sort of spiritual obligation to perform a series of acts that are supposed to atone your sins and again connect you closer to your belief, your strong belief system in the power of this devoting yourself to God and honoring the beliefs. And so Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are three faiths that are, all believe in one God, even though they might have a different interpretation of the story. They do share many of the same holy sites in Jerusalem, and they share prophets such as Abraham. And so here we've got two pictures of different faiths who subscribe to the idea of the pilgrimage. And there's a couple of videos that I encourage you to watch, but you don't have to, just explaining the power of these pilgrimages. And you can see the amount of people that also subscribe to this belief system. The Kaaba is the most sacred site in Islam, and there's the 5-day pilgrimage called the Jihad, and it involves lots of different types of rituals. One of them is walking around the Kaaba, and it really is sort of like where the Muslim life is centered. And so a lot of the rituals come around the beliefs that kind of exuberate and stretch out from the Kaaba. This is a really great video that I'd like for you again to stop and watch this required video that explains these ideas of the value of this pilgrimage to the Mecca Kaaba. So it's a cube, that's what it means in Arabic. And I've kind of tried to, this is like a illustration of what it looks like inside. People don't go inside. It's more of a symbol of subscribing to these ritualistic beliefs. And so inside of it, it's fairly bare. It just has some of these, traditions and sort of part of the Quran might be displayed in there as well. And here's a bunch of videos that describe it more if you want to learn more about it on your own, but they're not required. So just a brief history. For the most part, the Islamic culture had more like these civil kind of religious leaders called caliphs, and they were considered to be successors of Muhammad. And so they were ruling up until about 1258 in Egypt, until the Ottomans came in and took over and really started to have a different system of politics. And still, even though the politics were changing, the word of Islam and the belief system was still spreading all throughout Europe and the Middle East and into northern parts of Africa. And so it's interesting to think about how the missionaries and these different cultures got their ideas across. And so this video sort of helps to describe that. Some of the architecture that I want you to be aware of, there's, the influence of Roman, early Christian, and Byzantine architecture on the Muslims was really strong. And you can see that in their shrines, mosques, and palaces. And for your homework this week, I'm going to have you focus on the mosques. But it's interesting to think about how decorative their shrines, their mosques, their palaces are, which is very similar to some of the things that we saw with the Byzantine period as well. And so if you want to learn more about the Dome of the Rock, this is a great video that kind of gives you some more ideas about, again, how exquisite and detailed the fine craftsmanship to the exterior and the interior is. So one of the first mosques we're going to talk about is the Great Mosque of Damascus, in Syria. And it was really the birthplace of a lot of the key elements of Muslim architecture, which you're also going to want to talk about in the homework. So these different arches, the minaret, which would have been the call to prayer, and I'll talk more about that, but just really honoring some of the foundations and again, how they're influenced from the Roman culture. So the minarets are the towers, and they're also what was used to call people to prayer. And so they were very significant. And you can see how they're designed again, to reference some of the other cultures that we've already studied. Another great mosque is the mosque in Spain, Cordoba, which is also very famous for, again, going through these different, going from a church to a mosque and being converted, and how it relates to these ideas of, even though there are different mosques in these different parts of the world, there are similarities and there are differences, and the different way that a religion would come in and honor the belief system that was there, but then explore these other ideas as well. So inside the Great Mosque of Cordoba is the mihrab, and the mihrab is a really important part of, again, some of the religious practices of the Islamic faith. And so it's going to indicate, no matter where the mosque is, the mihrab indicates the direction of Mecca. So that's going to indicate to its followers in which direction they need to face to pray. And again, here's a required video where you'll learn more about that. This talks about the different types of arches that are important to the Islamic architecture: the semicircle arch, the horseshoe arch, the pointed arch, and the keel arch. All again, showing, so if travelers and traders were coming into these mosques, it would also accentuate how they're taking the historical architectural achievements and having them extend in these different ways. The pillars, the hypostyle pillars in the Cordoba Mosque are incredible, and I think it's fascinating to think about how they were built, and then the design by having different colored stones that would, again, represent their exquisite planning and achievements mathematically. So again, they're just trying to dazzle anybody who would be coming in, traders or people who were learning more about the Islamic faith. Another mosque is a mosque in Egypt that was the Sultan Hassan's mosque, and again, you can learn more about it, and it will be things that will help you with your reading, your discussion post for this week. So one of the things that's famous about the Egyptian Malnik art is the way that they did their Albic masonry, and it involves alternating these light and dark stones. And so again, it was to kind of show to the travelers how decadent and rich and skilled they were as a culture and a society. And so these spaces were very much a meeting place, almost like a grand hotel. The other technique that was very famous in these particular mosques were the thin glass that they had developed, and it enabled them to, I feel like a lot of these cultures were always trying to outstep the other cultures in trading, so then they could make more money, right? So if you're able to learn a technique to have thin glass, which then could be used as a lamp, the thinner the glass, then obviously the more light would come out of it. And these are all things that would have had a big impact on the ability to trade. This particular lamp has inscriptions that would have honored the Sultan and giving him good wishes. So the Malniks in Egypt, the artisans of that particular culture, were really skilled in the way that they used glass, ivory, metal, textiles. And here's an example of how they're using brass inlaid in silver and gold. You can see the detailed arabesque ornamental designs that we'll talk about, along with some of the features that would indicate the story they're exploring with this particular artifact. And I want you to go ahead and watch this video to learn more about that. Moving on to Iran, this is a great mosque where, again, all of these mosques have a certain amount of continuity and similarity, but they also all have their own individual aesthetics and sort of special architectural designs to reflect that particular culture's ideas, peoples, and how they wanted to use these spaces. So in this particular mosque, we have the Iwan plans, which is a rectangular space, like an entry with these vaulted ceilings, and then into this huge courtyard that would be used for people to gather, to be able to discuss, learn, educate, all these different things that would be happening in this large courtyard. And it also indicates, again, the architectural achievements and the detail of this particular success of their artisan skills. And you can also see the minarets, which are a big part of the Islamic practices. So getting into the ornamental art, one of the main religious features that you see is this form called arabesque, and you can see how it's these very complicated, detailed designs. And it's influenced because Muhammad really didn't want the artist to imitate God or the creator of life. He wanted the images in art to consist of designs, not people or animals. And so it was really restricted and discouraged that artists use, instead of having people or animals, these very repetitive and almost psychedelic style imagery, this very specific ornamental style. And you can see it in the different materials that they use: cut tile, wooden strap work, and all the other types of arabesque that you see in the marble, in the different ways that it's represented in the mosques and other palaces and shrines. Here's an example. So, this particular carved niches that would display ceramics, this is from about the 16th century, again indicates the amount of trade and relationships that are going on. So supposedly one of the rulers from China came to Iran and gave the ruler so many little artifacts that he had this special space built so he could display all of these artifacts. So there was a lot of intermingling between the rulers and the different cultures. Calligraphy played a huge impact in the Arabic language and the Islamic arts. And you can really, again, we're not going to have time to study it, but you could study it and really recognize how it's also like a decoration. And the Quran, the holy book of Islamic faith, you see how specific the brushstroke and the way that it was really considered one of the highest status art forms in the Islamic society if you were a calligrapher, because you would have to know exactly how to space each gesture of the script. There's no ruling on the parchment, so you really it was like a memorized way, again, like it was a spiritual process. And the scribes were not only writing these important religious phrases, but they also did it in this very artistic way that was almost like a meditative religious experience. The calligraphy was also found on ceramics, and so in the city of Iraq, you could see this very blocky, kind of angular type calligraphy, and the inscription here reads, "Knowledge, the beginning of it is bitter to taste, but the end is sweeter than honey." So again, it kind of it indicates that there was this process of trying to help people to realize that there was the acknowledgement that following the religious path wasn't always easy in the beginning, but in the long run, it was very fruitful. And so you see that in a lot of the artifacts that have been left behind. There's a lot of different developments during this Islamic artifacts that we have been found, and a lot of them are in the ceramics. And so one of them is this lusterware that resembled precious metals, and it was a way, again, to make their objects look even more richer than they might have actually been. So it was, again, a way to encouraged the traders to buy these objects because they looked so rich in the way they were crafted. And the enamel that they were using as well had a big impact on how they could use multicolored glazes that, again, would give their pots, the Persian potters, a leg up over some of the other ceramics that would be brought to market in these trade environments. So moving over to Spain, this was the last Muslim dynasty, the Nazarids in Spain. And here we're looking at the Alhambra, which is in Granada, and it's this, gorgeous palace where the ruler would have these, very specific territories to view from all of these different, like porchways, that these arches that had these specific niches, and so it was all the architecture was just as important in not only its visual stunningness, but in how it was actually used to protect the ruler and to be able to see his territory. So the Alhambra was one of the last and greatest Moorish palaces, which is a sect of the Muslim civilization. And here's a really great video that talks about this particular palace and the different achievements that the Moorish people had created in this palace. And one of them that they're famous for is they had this particular fountain, which I guess had some sort of a hydraulic system. So I'm not quite sure exactly what that was about. But so the scientific techniques and the achievements that the mathematicians would have had to have been able to create to be able to force the water out, I guess, was a big deal. We're not seeing an example of it here because this is just a drawing of what it would have looked like. It's much more of a ruin now. So basically now we're kind of getting into the what came after. The three powers emerged in the Islamic world, and I don't know if really what came after, but like how these different historical cultures were influencing each other. So to the west of the Ottoman Empire, you see how we're going now. We're the Islamic world is still flourishing, but it's not necessarily in the political power. The Ottoman power has taken over, and if you remember, the Ottomans also took over from the Byzantines. So the Ottoman Empire became incredibly huge, and it was not that there weren't these different religions happening. It was more like that was the political power at that particular time. And the different sort of sections or factions of the Ottoman Empire. And so there was the Ottoman Empire to the west, the Ottoman Empire to the east, which was ruled more by a little bit of a different philosophy, and it was very corrupt. And then the Mongols would have been more in northern Asia, which of course Genghis Khan, which is a really interesting ruler from Mongolia. So you have all these different factions happening, and just to think about how they influenced each other. Still, within that, like I was saying, you still have mosques, and there are people that are still following the same traditions. It's just their governing is different. And so here you're seeing in the Ottoman Empire a mosque for the Sultan Selim, and this is in Western Turkey, and you're still seeing a lot of the same influences from those traditions that were created 500-600 years before this particular mosque was built. And how the different sultans would spend a lot of money on these building programs to try and win back a lot of the power and control. The Ottoman Empire was very powerful within its political gain, and also still being influenced with the Islamic beliefs and religious practices. And so here you're seeing something called the Targas, which would have reflected the Sultan's seal. And this is a great video that kind of really looks at the details of this incredibly beautiful, almost like a stamp that you also see in different cultures. The Ottoman Empire also had some achievements in the ceramics with an underglazing that, again, was very specific to a type of process called fruitware. And again, it's a kitchenware. So now they're applying different ways to be able to have the surface of these objects that are able to be, used for a long period of time because of the way that they are now have these different glazes. So different things to think about, and you'll be responding to in your discussion post for this week. But I think these are some questions, thinking about how the various mosques across the Islamic world, what they have in common, what they don't have in common, how they're similar but different. Images of people are not allowed in religious contexts, and just kind of how that affects the artistic techniques. And then, of course, the structures being so influenced by the Roman and Byzantine architecture, and who they borrowed and why, and then again, how they transform them. So you don't have to answer these. These are just kind of things to think about from your reading, from the videos, as you're acquiring some of this information. And these ideas might come out and be reflected in your weekly discussion posts for Islamic art. So thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you watch all the videos that will really inspire you to understand even more. So thank you.